Tonight on Point Blank, we're talking about the National Investment Bank. The Member of Parliament for Bolga Central, who is a ranking on the Finance Committee of Parliament, is my guest in studio, the Honorable Issac Adongo. He has issue, I don't know if it's he or is a minority side, with the government's handling of NIB. I'm confused. BNI is now also called NIB. So you're not referring to the people who catch
I'm
people
talking
along?
about the National Investment
The
Bank.
bank.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
I'm okay. How is Bolga Central?
We are doing well. It's been a while. I saw you roaming around the world.
Oh, I went to chill small.
When I grow, I'll be like you.
Oh, you know, in this, if the things are too hard, you have to run away and then go and chill and come back.
You know me, I've not been a contest, so one in a day.
Hey. Be careful.
Okay. I've taken judicial notice.
How is the registration exercise happening in your constituency? You're monitoring it?
Yeah, it's going well. Initially, we had a few challenges. The numbers were not looking good, but subsequently, I was home. We engaged the stakeholders, and we found some of the bottlenecks, and some additional deployments were made, and they are looking encouraging now.
Great. Let's talk about what is your difficulty with the National Investment Bank?
My difficulty with the National Investment Bank is that the National Investment Bank is our national pride. It's one of those banks that were set up way back in the 1960s and was given quite a clear mandate to provide some scaling up of investments in various sectors of the economy and to contribute towards national development. At the time, we didn't have this universal bank, so it was a specialized development bank, which was the tool, particularly for financing or pre-financing government projects, even before government made money to be able to pay for it. So most of our infrastructure were built by contractors and businessmen who relied on the National Investment Bank. At some point when NIB saw that there was a need to create a niche, particularly in agriculture financing, there was a department that was created within the NIB. And at some point they felt that was not focused enough. So they created a subsidiary called the Agriculture Development Bank and transferred that department to Agriculture Development Bank to be able to facilitate the investment in agriculture.
So the ADB came out of NIB.
Yes, and that's why I kept saying that no matter how grown and rich a man is, he can never marry his mother. So that is the mother of ADB. It's a sacrilege, an abomination to think that the son now you think is better that he can marry the mother. That can never happen.
How is that happening, and who wants that to happen?
Well, the government has.
First of all, what's the state of the mother? Then we can talk about.
So
the
mother is in difficulty.
That's NIB.
Yes. I better describe the mother's sickness as that of diabetes. The son equally is sick. The ADB itself is sick. It doesn't meet the capital adequacy requirement if you decide to adjust for its risk on the balance sheet.
Let's not go to ADB. Let's deal with NIB first.
Yeah, but they are together.
Okay, I wanted to know what the specific elements of NIB
currently, when there was this recapitalization of the banks, government owns 100% the NIB. Mm-hmm. Everybody capitalized their banks, brought additional capital. Government alone refused to bring capital to capitalize its own bank, which is the National Investment Bank.
And because government is a regulator, government could not shut down its own bank.
Exactly. So it exercised through Bank of Ghana what we call regulatory forbearance, basically looking elsewhere and pretending that you are not seeing whatever is happening.
So it whipped all other banks in line and left its own bank.
And left its own bank. Mm-hmm. And if the purpose for the recapitalization was to create stronger banks, it means that you had allowed NIB not to be strong.
So you're sure that NIB did not recapitalize?
No, NIB did not recapitalize. I remember that at the time they wanted to use gov't to perform some gymnastics, and I took them to court because it was against the Banks and Special Deposits Protection Act 930 of 2016, particularly Section 9D. So I took them to court on that, and they departed from that. There are quite a lot of issues if it comes to gov't and how they finance the other four banks, saddling them with cumulative, not redeemable preference shares. Clearly very illegal. But
so NIB's first crime, recapitalization, did not happen. So the capital ratio is not that good.
It's not good.
Okay, what other problems are there with NIB?
Then government took very opportunistic conduct in relation to NIB. You say you don't have money, but you give loans to them. So you go and give them $500 million in government bonds, and the most valuable asset on the bank, you swap it. You go and take the most valuable asset. I call it asset harvesting. Just go and look for what is best here, and it is the NIB has 24% stake in Nestle Ghana. It is the most valuable asset on the balance sheet. You go and take it and give it debt. Then at some point you come and give them another 80 million debt. You say it's a deposit for equity. You never go through the process to convert it. So your own bank that you don't have money to recapitalize ends up owing you 1.3 billion. And I'm saying, if they owe you 1.3 billion, it is your money, it is your bank. Simply transfer it from an obligation you expect them to pay you back to equity. So right away, you get 1.3 billion in capital.
So you restructured?
You restructured the balance sheet by simply changing the obligations on the balance sheet. When we say you restructure, you are changing the obligations on the balance sheet. So it moves from a debt that the bank has to pay you.
So instead of a debit, it becomes a credit.
Good. But then there's
For
still
the
a
bank.
debit. There's still a debit because what you gave to it, because they have now given you shares for the 1.3 billion, the 1.3 billion worth of debt still sits on the balance sheet as investment in government bonds.
Okay.
So if they want more cash, they can go and sell the 1.3 billion government bonds and bring in pure cash of 1.3 billion. They can go and sell the 500 million worth of the 24% Nestle shares. They get in cash of another 500 million. So 1.8 billion cash. Show me any bank in Ghana that has cash sitting there, 1.8 billion. Okay, now those shares were bought for 50 million. So if you sell it for 500 million, it means you've made a profit of how much? 450 million. So that 450 million is capital surplus or capital gains, which goes to increase your capital. So you see the 1.3 billion plus the 450 million, you're already at 1.75 billion.
So what you're saying is that NIB is not in good condition, but it can be brought in a very good condition with just this restructuring.
And the monies are sitting on the balance sheet owed to the owner of the bank.
So the owner decides, has a right to exercise
to decide that pay me my money or I give it to you to capitalize.
Okay, which you are advising that it does.
That is the only option. Because
what has government decided to do instead?
So government is playing a very funny game now. They said they want ADB to come and buy NIB. Now
It's not a merger.
No,
it's an acquisition.
It's an acquisition. Now, even if it's a merger, we'll come to that.
Okay.
If you are going to buy NIB, ADB doesn't have the money. It means that somebody has to give ADB the money.
ADB is also not good.
ADB doesn't even meet the minimum capital adequacy requirement per Basel 2 and 3, which is 13% minimum. They have less than 10%. So ADB itself, like I said, is suffering from some diabetes, some asthma. Now you want to combine asthma with diabetes and produce what kind of a human being? You don't add a bad bank to a bad bank. Never done. A good bank can buy a bad bank, yes, and use its strength to improve that bank. But the conversation is that ADB itself must be treated for its own individual illness. And NIB must be treated for its own individual ailments.
Separately.
If you do that, they will be so healthy, they will not even be interested in coming together.
Okay.
That is what we want us to do. Then, so ADB, ownership of ADB is clear. Bank of Ghana, very conflicted. You own 64% of ADB through your 100% subsidiary called the Financial Investment Trust. Government owns 21% of ADB. And the government, through the investment made by the National Trust Holding Company in Ghana, Amalgamated Trust, owns 11%. So that gives you 96% of government ownership. So it means that technically government is going to give the money to NIB. The money you say you don't have to capitalize your other bank. You give it to ADB, your own bank. Then you pass back and come and buy NIB. When you buy the NIB, the money will be paid to the owner, which is you. Then the next moment, you announce that you no longer own NIB because you have sold it. You sold it to yourself. Where did you get the money from? Who took the money? Why all these complications?
Okay, explain this to me. This thing you've just said, is it something that the government has actually publicized that it intends to do, or this grapevine information that you have picked up?
So one of your sister stations published a disturbing story on ADB acquiring NIB. We have subsequently had conversation with the Commercial Workers Union, and I have documents in my car to the extent that they have written officially to the President of the Republic. They will not write on account of speculations. Mm-hmm. There have been some concrete conversations within the leadership of NIB, ADB, and the Bank of Ghana and the Ministry of Finance. Those information have filtered back to us. And we are saying that in a country that is struggling to even retain NAPCO jobs. You want to lay people off sustainable jobs? Hell no. And we saw what happened the last time. Now, if you decide now that ADB should buy it, and I give the example, Umaru, you built a house. You are living there with your family. You go to the bank to take a loan. Come and buy your own house. Pay yourself. Go and put the money in the bank. The next morning, you come and tell your children, let's go and live in a rented premises because I've sold the house. You sold it to who? Who collected the money? Where did you get the money from? So,
whose interest is going to be served by this cooking that you talked about?
I have my own idea of what's happening. But I just want you to understand that it doesn't make sense introducing these complications in very simple, obvious, and common sense finance decisions can only be for an ulterior motive.
Okay.
To confuse you and I, and in the process, something would happen.
What about NIB is struggling? Yes. What if buying or acquiring NIB by ADB would save NIB and save our money because the bank is about to collapse, another entity, and let's not regard ADB as even government. Let's regard ADB as another entity deciding to acquire this to save us. Would that not be a better decision to take than to allow and watch NIB go down?
If it were, we will not be having this conversation. Unfortunately, ADB is not for a private person. It's for the state. Mm-hmm. And I've given you the shareholding structure, 96% owned by the state. 2, ADB itself doesn't have the money. So the person who has to give the money to ADB to come and buy NIB supposedly to save it is the same person who is refusing to save NIB. Do
you know if the money is going to be given to ADB by government or ADB is going on the market somewhere, find money and go and use that to acquire?
Which market is that?
Borrow.
Borrow from who?
I don't know.
Go and read Section 90 of the Banks and Special Deposit-Taking Institutions Act 930.
They can't.
You cannot use leverage to capitalize a bank.
So the only way for ADB to be able to acquire NIB is if you have government injection.
Exactly. And I'm saying that government already have money. See, if ADB comes to buy NIB, it means that the 1.3 billion will have to be paid to the owner. Who is that person? It's the government.
Okay.
Okay, that debt sitting there has to be paid. Who takes that money? Bank of Ghana or the government of Ghana. And I'm saying that if you have the money to give to somebody to come and buy your own asset, which just doesn't make sense, give it to your bank and save it. And I'm even saying that you don't need to bring the money because you already have money locked up in NIB, which can be redesignated in terms of its NIB's obligation to you in order that NIB will come out of the hole. And we did the analysis. You could actually raise 2.75 billion from the balance sheet of NIB to clear off the 2.4 billion deficit in capital and leave 350 million, and you are looking for 400 million. So 50 million is left. Just simply ask the Financial Investment Trust to take part of the Financial Stability Fund of 15 billion Bank of Ghana is going to set up to come and put in the NIB.
Why don't you look at it from another angle where you have two vehicles that are about to break down and you decide to remove the tires under one to fix under the other so you can move? Could that not be what the government is doing, that we have two ailing banks, let's save one and kill the other to save this one? Makes sense, doesn't it?
So you have a vehicle, you have two vehicles. The other one, you say the tires is faulty, and I'm showing you a spare tire. You say you don't want the spare tire.
Yeah, because this car,
I'm showing you that there's a spare tire, and that's a 1.3 billion sitting in the bank there. Mm-hmm. Why are you still interested in buying a new tire? When I'm showing you the spare tire, use a spare tire. You save that bank. Go here, use a spare tire. You save that bank.
So you want tools to be saved?
We have to have two banks. You see,
what if it's becoming a problem? Government has.
It cannot be a problem.
Government has CBG, has GCB, has ADB, NIB. Which other one do we have? These are the ones that government has. Maybe the problems are too many for government.
You have a good example to show. You see, what will happen to ADB and NIB coming together is what happened to CBG. When CBG set up and took the 7 banks, you know the number of branches? There were 190 branches. They immediately prematurely came out and announced that CBG is the second largest bank after GCB in terms of branch network. Today, how many branches do they have? 114. What happened to the 76 branches? What happened to the people who used to work there? What has been to the livelihoods that those branches supported? So clearly, you know that anything, whether a merger or acquisition, will not happen in such a way that the entity will operate two universal licenses. It will not happen that two financial controllers from ADB, NIB will work together. One will go. It cannot happen that there will be two managing directors. It cannot happen that in the small community of Bolga, you are going to have ADB and NIB. One branch will be subsumed by the other. What happens to the workers? So this is a clear, you see, when it happens that way, the landlord, the one who came to buy you, he needs one person to leave the house. Is it the tenant that will leave or the landlord?
So you foresee...
No, I just want to ask you.
So you foresee job losses?
I foresee a shrinking group. I foresee operationally that it is not possible to strategically operate two banks alongside and compete against yourself. Operationally and cost-effective-wise, you will need to rationalize and calibrate the branches. Because, you see, when CBG did that, initially they were spending 360 million just to run the branches, and it was not sustainable. They had to close them off. So it is obvious that straight away, one of the banks will go, or a combination of the two banks will go. Okay. And so we will not have two banks as we have today. And I'm saying that in the end, we will be worse off.
So for you, let's keep the two banks so that people don't lose their money, people don't lose their jobs and all of the consequences that you've talked about. Let's go. But you've done a press conference today. You're speaking to me. Who can prevent this chaos from coming into bank? And what would you say to them?
So, fortunately, there is a legal dimension to this. The National Investment Bank was set up by an act of parliament, National Investment Bank Act 612. And the Parliament of Ghana knew that there may be extenuating circumstances under which the bank may have to die, and provided under Section 22 of it, the liquidation procedures, that if you want to do anything that will ultimately or affect the life of this bank, you need to come to Parliament for Parliament to pass an act pursuant to that objective and give directives as to how it should be done.
Really?
Now remember, if you come to Parliament, we would open all the options available. Is death the only consequence this bank can suffer? Are there other possibilities and options? And the people of Ghana, in their wisdom who set up the bank, will take an appropriate decision that is consistent with the ultimate objective of Ghana. So and what we decide becomes the mandate.
So it cannot be arbitrary.
No.
It has to come for parliamentary.
Exactly. So the only way is that Bank of Ghana, National Investment Bank, after having been established by Parliament, went to take a license from the Bank of Ghana and came under the regulatory supervision of Bank of Ghana. The same Parliament has passed a law to say that anybody who takes a license from Bank of Ghana and comes under the regulation of Bank of Ghana can be treated under Act 930. And the options are there. You can put it under administration, and the administration has several angles to lead to an ultimate objective. It is not only collapse. There are several scenarios that administration will lead.
So your intent...
You can then decide to revoke the license and place it under receivership. Under the circumstances, it's quite clear that is not the objective of government. So regulatory powers basically don't apply. So
your intent is to use Parliament to prevent this from happening. We would
use Parliament, we will use the courts of Ghana, we will use every legitimate means to protect the livelihoods of our people.
Honorable Member of Parliament for Bolga Central, Ranking Member on Finance Committee, Issac Adongo, who takes part in the Bonaboto games every now and then and wins a puppy as a trophy. Thank you for joining me on Point Blank.
Thank you very much, my good brother. But I'm happy you give me this platform because the idea of ADB, NIB is very dear to my heart. There are thousands of workers of these banks and their families who are listening to me today, and they are just praying to God that government should listen. And I hope government does listen.
Thank you so much. So that's a Member of Parliament.